welcome to the show. I have a great honor to have with me today Seth Godin, somebody that I have been deeply following for at least a decade. Had the opportunity to meet randomly in an event about 8 or 10 years ago. And I believe this man has more to do with the transformation of ethical marketing than anybody in the history of marketing. I know he has a lot of collaborators and a big team of people that he works with and learns from and teaches around the world. But it is a great honor to have him here on the Authentic Networker to talk about ethical marketing. And today we're going to be featuring his newest book, Strategy, which I just finished like 10 minutes ago. And my first question for you, Seth, is I want to give context to the interview by just telling people a tiny bit about you. 21 best-selling books. That's interesting bedrock context for somebody that we're going to interview about strategy. I want you to speak about in this interview your history with ethical email marketing, Yahoo and that company that came before Yahoo, I think it was, and AI, your history with AI, because you started working on it 25 years ago with some of the pioneers of that concept. And today it is right in our face, changing our lives, whether we know it or not, or want it to or not. And one of the most inspirational things about you is your motivation. I won't call it discipline because it's not my favorite word, but I'll call it your motivation for consistency. And because you have authored a blog, correct me if I'm wrong, every day, without fail. Now, if there's a day, go ahead and correct me, but I believe it's every day without fail for over 11 years, which is over 4,000 blogs. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually 10,000 posts in a couple months, so more than 11 years. It's an unbroken streak, except you have to play with time zones, because when Steve Jobs died, or retired, I wrote that post a couple hours before midnight. So in the United Kingdom, it was already the next day.
Let's fast forward. I want my audience to hear about your story about how you got booted out of the American Marketing Association for railing against spam. And maybe you lost that battle.
Well, I ended up winning in the end. So the deal is this. Let's say you're in the Direct Marketing Association. This is all the big catalogs and people who do this for a living. Stamps are one of your biggest expenses. You're constantly buying mailing lists, putting a stamp on a letter and mailing it out. It turns out that this expense is one of the best things going for it because it keeps people from sending an infinite amount of mail. And so when email showed up, the company I started, the one that invented email marketing, our slogan for a time was, it's direct mail with free stamps. And what became very clear is that if stamps are free, people will use an infinite number of them. And then the water will get really polluted, because if you're getting 10,000 or 20,000 pieces of email a day, you're not going to read any of them. And so I testified in the US Senate about making a law to make spam illegal, because it should be. And they were aghast that a member of the Direct Marketing Association would do this. And I tried to explain to them that the people it was going to hurt weren't their members. They were the scammers. They were the people, saying that I work for the king of whatever, and you have a briefcase with $50 million in it. Do you want it? They're all the people who are willing to skulk around in the shadows. And so they kicked me out. And then 10 years later, they put me in their Hall of Fame. So I'm happy with that. It worked out okay.
There's still spam. You proposed a great idea about charging for email. Can you share that story?
So we built Yoyodyne to the point where it was sending and receiving more email every day than any company in the world. And that's when it was hard to send email. And then Yahoo bought us. And so I was in the room in Yahoo, 1999, when Yahoo was the internet. Between Yahoo, AOL, and a couple other companies, we were the bulk of the consumer internet in the US. And I said, look, I tried to get together a meeting with Steve Case and a couple other influential people. I said, 5 of us are enough to decide this. Let's make a deal where every one of our users gets 200 free emails a week. For sure. And if you want more, you got to pay a penny each. And we will give that penny to the recipient or to the recipient's platform. So there'll be all this pennies floating back and forth. And what it would have done is made stamps cost something. And what it would have done is made it that you couldn't possibly spam people on Gmail or Yahoo the way it's done now, because people who spam send 2, 3, 4 million at a time, and they didn't have that many pennies. And the problem was in 1999, the internet bubble was going full speed. And Steve Case and Jerry Yang said, look, the stock goes up $3 a day. Leave us alone. Don't break anything. We're fine. And it was true for a couple of years, and then it wasn't.
You were fighting a system there.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's dive into the book, Seth. You have written a lot of extraordinary books and like performed some extraordinary marketing wizardry. I have as a gift up here somewhere.
Oh, you got the milk carton.
I do. We both have one. That's pretty amazing. That's the Purple Cow book, for those of you who have not read it. But let's talk about strategy in this book. I got to tell you, I both listened to the Audible, and I appreciate that you read it, which is a lesson I learned in doing my books. I read the first versions, and then when I rewrote them, I had somebody else read them because I was too busy. And boy, I got a feedback loop on that. No matter how good they were at reading, nobody liked hearing somebody they knew wasn't me. And so I did it myself again. So I appreciate you reading the book. And I both read it and listened to it, and I found it to be extraordinarily deep. Like, all I could think about as I was reading this book was, this needs to be an organizational project for all companies, where all the key stakeholders in the company have the book, have the Audible. We're going to spend a year, and maybe we're going to take each one of these items, because I love the fact that you didn't do chapters, but what do you call each individual? Riffs, yeah. So they're little tiny riffs, paragraph, 2 paragraphs, a half a page, on all these different distinctions and stories about strategy, which just, it was so deep and so rich. All I could think about is, all of my clients and all my colleagues, we need to spend a year studying this book, but everybody needs to participate in, okay, this riff, where does this apply to us? How are we blind here? How are we off track? How are we going backwards? Let's create a breakthrough here. So let's talk about strategy the way you laid it out: systems, games, time, and empathy. Can you do a deep dive on each one of those in whatever order appeals to you?
All right, well, let's start with this. You have a question that you need to answer tomorrow, which is, what should I do now? That seems like a pretty simple question if you have a job at the Ford Motor Company on the assembly line. What you should do now is go to your 6 a.m. shift and do what the boss says. But how many of us do that for a living? The rest of us have to make a decision. What should I do now? Should I buy a mailing list? Should I start a new division? Should I hire someone? Should I fire someone? Should I use social media? Which social media should I use? There's all these questions. And we have no clue about how to begin to answer them. And what a strategy is not the tactics. The tactics are the answers to the questions. The strategy are the questions. What are you doing to understand the world and the change you seek to make, so you're not wasting your time and your money? And so the reason I needed to write the book, and the reason the book is written, and I'm so flattered that you get the joke, that it's deep, is because I'm writing about something that almost no one has ever written about before, which is, what should I do now? And so I believe that in order to understand strategy, you need to understand 4 things that don't seem related, that are obvious once you hear them, and that dance with each other. So here they are. The first one is systems. Every time human beings engage with each other over time, we build a system. You meet a stranger in North America, you reach your right hand out to shake their hand. That is built into the system. When the telephone was invented, no one knew what to say when they answered it. And it took Thomas Edison to invent the word hello. It's part of the system of communication. That systems are largely invisible and they're very powerful. So there's the college industrial complex, which is from the time you're in third grade, your parents push you to do certain things in school so you can get into a famous college so that they can feel good about their parenting skills, and on and on and on. And that system involves tenured professors and leafy campuses and football teams and going into debt. All of those things make it feel normal. And so whatever you do for a living, you're doing it inside of a system that already exists. And you need to see the system, and you need to decide, is your job to change the system or to use the system? So back when I was a telemarketer in the early days of my career, there was this system called the telephone. And for almost no money, I could call any business in the world on the phone, and they felt an obligation to answer the call. And then I could have a conversation that cost me some time and them if they listened, and maybe I could turn that system into something of service that they would send me money for. But if you don't understand the system of attention and telephones, you don't understand how to be a telemarketer. Okay, so there's systems. Then there's time. Because tomorrow is not just like today. Tomorrow is different than today. And when we do something, we are investing today's time, hoping that the future person of us will say thanks for doing that. We are planting seeds that if you want to build a forest, the best time to start is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now, but you're not going to get trees for a while. What seeds are you planting? Where are you planting them? How are you allocating the resources it's going to take to grow them? The third one are games. Games is this idea that we don't have to take ourselves so seriously all the time. Everything we do is a move. And if the move doesn't work, well, then we learn that the move didn't work, not that we're a bad person. And we can make a different move next time. Games have rules. Games have boundaries. Games have timing. And the last one is empathy. Another word that people think of when they think of kindness, but that's not what I'm talking about. Empathy is simply imagining what the other person wants and needs because they don't care what you want and need. They care what they want and need. And if you can't show up for them, why should they give you their trust and attention? So, sorry, I'm ranting a lot, but you asked me to do all four, so there you go.
The four cornerstones of strategy. So, games, one of the things I found most gratifying in the book was the deep discussion of, short-term immediate games and infinite games. And that kind of seems to speak to the difference between the kind of tribe that you're gathering and the kind of tribe that a lot of other people are gathering. So can we go into that some, like the difference between the short-term immediate gratification games, the infinite games, which kind of person plays which, and how to stay in your lane, which probably is the biggest challenge.
Okay, so there are two kinds of games, according to James Carse, finite and infinite games. An infinite game is easy to understand. It's playing catch with your 3-year-old niece. You don't try to win catch with a 3-year-old. You play catch so you can keep playing catch. And many of us have infinite games in our lives where the goal isn't to win, it's to play. And then there are finite games. Finite games have outcomes. They have usually a timer. There's a way to keep score. Within finite games, there's the super short-term finite game. This is what a lot of insurance brokers do, which is dialing for dollars, bothering people at cocktail parties. You want to buy some insurance? If they say no, you go on to the next person. That game doesn't make you a successful insurance broker. The long-term game, which is not infinite, but is a long-term game, is how do I get elected head of the local kayak club and then be of service to 50 people in my community. And one day, one of those people, because they trust me, will say, I used to buy insurance from my brother-in-law, but he's annoying. I hear you sell insurance because they trust you. You played a longer game. You made investments. And so when you see which game you are playing and who the other competitors are, the lesson of don't play games you can't win becomes critical. If you are on TikTok hoping to become well off and famous, you are playing a game you can't win. Someone is going to get well off and famous on TikTok, but probably not going to be you.
It might be my next guest next week, a kid named Michael DiMuccio, who does YouTube shorts parroting people playing video games. How he thought that niche up, I don't know, but he gets 5 to 10 million views a video. I don't know how that's duplicatable for any of us. So how about this, Seth? One of the places that I find people get conflicted, they get off track. They're not sure how to play the game. They're not sure what their strategy should be, is when the ownership is shifting or has competing agendas. So you have maybe private equity ownership, and how does that play into a strategy of, hey, let's build a better company and a better community and be of better service for an infinite period of time, compared to maybe a public company, a little different agenda, versus a private company with partners versus family. There's 4 different ownership structures. How does that play in? How do you manage that as somebody who's in charge of strategy?
Right. So, when you pick your customers, you pick your future. And when you pick your owners, you pick your future. So when did Google get wrecked? Because it's wrecked. I think we can all agree that it's not the experience it used to be to use it, and that its future is really cloudy because they completely missed the boat on the AI that they helped invent. They got wrecked when the ownership shifted to the dumbest, shortest term thinking people in the world, which are short-term traders on the stock market, who are just looking to see how did they do last week. Now, if you're one of the 10,000 people who work at Google who have stock options, you're paying attention. You're doing what those people want. And so there is a human at Google who had to make choices about whether to optimize for advertisers or optimize for users. Well, because it's company's owned by people who keep track week to week, he optimized for advertisers and he wrecked it. And so you don't have to work for a company that is spiraling downhill. That's your choice where to work. And who your owners are becomes part of that choice. And so there are some private equity companies that show up and they say, we can provide more patience and insight than the public market. So therefore, our strategy is going to be to outperform public companies by making investments in a longer game. But there are also private equity companies filled with people who don't care and are just trying to flip something in 5 minutes. And we can see that in the way that they choose a strategy and how they choose to behave. So the strategy person needs to be clear. What are they being measured on? What game do the people they work with, what game are they playing? Because if you decide to play one game and the people who are counting on you think you're playing a different game, that's not going to lead to a lot of happiness.
Examples. One of the things I loved about your book was, it begged the question to me, man, how does he come up with so many stories and so many examples, detailed, granular stories that nail the distinction? So any of those that you want to tell today, my audience wants to hear. The question that maybe will bring forth a couple are examples you have of organic, natural systems that lead to an infinite growth versus, and maybe speaking to like the core of it being a raving fan, like how important is it that the product experience, the user experience creates raving fans as the marketing strategy? And do you have examples of companies like, I love you say Google is wrecked. Who isn't wrecked? And how did they do it?
Okay, so let's go back to the ownership thing with a story first. The people at McDonald's aren't stupid. And they saw Shake Shack from the very first one that Danny Meyer opened in New York City. And they stood there and watched as it was one and then a dozen and then 100 and then hundreds of fast food places that redefined the category and eventually went public for over $1 billion. At any point, McDonald's had an advantage in every area to have built a Shake Shack killer, and they never did. And part of the reason is when McDonald's launches something new, it's at a scale that requires them to plan for a year just to make sure they don't run out of chicken. Like when they launched the Chicken McNugget, I think they used 8% of all the chicken in the United States that first year. So if you're not prepared for that, the system is going to cripple you. Whereas Danny didn't care. He had 2 restaurants. He'll get there, right? And so they were playing different games. Danny Meyer said, I'm running 1, 2, 5 little beautiful restaurants that I can experiment on in a way that the people at McDonald's would always be afraid to do so. Because they remember when they served pizza and they remembered when they had tablecloths and it was a failure. So they're not going anywhere near this kind of thing. So back to your point of what are the resilient strategies to build something that we can be proud of and that we care about? Well, for me, where I begin is the what's it for and the who's it for. Are you trying to make as much money as possible? Or are you trying to do work you're proud of? Are you trying to build a resilient community? What change are you seeking to make? So if I look at how Patagonia shifted their ownership strategy over a bunch of years of time, they have raving fans. People happily pay double or triple for what they sell. And now all of the money they make goes back into the cause that they are part of, which means they can recruit a different kind of person who works there and a different kind of fan because the story is different. If you think about, nonprofits that grew up during the era of TV, they're organized around raising $20 at a time with TV ads. And when the TV system changes, the way they raise money is threatened. And all of a sudden they can't help the kids the way they used to because the engine that they had that could have lasted forever doesn't because the technology changes. So I'm not sure there's a guaranteed way for every strategy to work, but I think we have to look at who's it for, what's it for, what is the story our customers tell the others, and that's what Purple Cow is about. And how do we build something that without excuse, we can say, my goal was to make something that did X, and we did X, right? So in the case of Yoyodyne, I wanted to change the way marketing worked, but I also knew that my personality and risk profile wouldn't let me stick with it to build something bigger than MailChimp. And so I sold the company because the idea could outlive me. The idea could keep going. And now MailChimp, they sold that company for more than $10 billion. And I'm fine with that because my goal wasn't to build MailChimp. My goal was to put ideas into the world that MailChimp could steal.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the richest parts of the book that resonated with me, Seth, was the idea of, this is how I think I try to articulate it with my clients, is there is the paradigm of goal setting to define success as some standard that, competes with other people that we're playing with. And then there's the idea of just defining success as progress. And a question I like to ask people is, so what if you could just make progress every year or every month? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be enough? Like if you could go back, rewind the last 10 years, if you got more fit, if your relationship with your spouse got better, if your wealth increased every year, wouldn't that just be like paradise? Wouldn't that be nirvana for... And yet that's not the paradigm. Most people fall into that trap. And you speak eloquently to that in the book. So got any examples of that?
Oh, I think you did it better than me. We have been indoctrinated from a very young age to want the home run, not the consistent single. And it's easier to get our energy. It's easier to get support. If you go to a VC and say, I need to raise money for my company, we're going to grow at 2% a year forever, they're not going to invest in you.
Right.
I know this because I tried. And they say, no, go make up numbers. We know you're not going to hit them, but we can't get our limited partners excited unless we show them the step change, the giant leap. And so the kind of goals you're talking about are often exist for motivation. And the happiest people I know are the people who can see through that and set themselves a different kind of goal. But it's very hard to lose an ounce a month for the next 20 years. It's much easier to go on a crash diet because you can enlist everyone around you to help you with that one.
Yeah. And the ounce a month, at least in the first 12 months.
Right. You don't notice.
Not very encouraging, right? So another, I don't know if you never know where you get stuff, right? But one of the stories I heard you tell was, as I was listening to the book, was the story about the dancer on the hill at the concert. And I have used that video clip for years. Who knows where I got it? Probably got it from you. But you, in your story, you tell about a parallel, some guy used it the same day you used it. But the lessons there are so valuable on, the first person to dance. And we all think the second person to dance is the most important one, but it's not the most important one, is it?
Right. So Derek Sivers and I both blogged it the same day. We didn't know each other. We have since become dear friends. And the video is a big music festival. You see one crazy guy dancing all by himself to the music. He's a leader at some level, but he's also a nutty. And then the second guy comes and dances with him. Now we got two nuts. But the third guy, in the words of Alice's Restaurant, now it's a movement. And once the third guy shows up, then there's 20 and 40 and 60 and the whole thing flips. Guy number 3, that's the person we need strategically to have something begin to catch on. And too often, we think we have a great idea. We're dancing by ourselves because we don't do the hard work of identifying who guy number 3 might be and why it would be in their interest to take the risk. Because it's very risky to be guy number 3. Because if you're guy number 3 and there isn't a guy number 4, now you feel like a nut. But if you are persistent as guy number 3, now it might tip. And so what we're looking for when we're doing these projects, whatever field they're in, is to create the conditions for people to spread the idea. It's not our job to spread the idea. They will spread the idea because it's good for them.
Yeah. And so what that dovetails into is it seems where a lot of companies get off track. And I think the system that throws them off track is the comparison goal setting system. But you do a brilliant job in the book of talking about, hey, what we're doing, if we're doing something unique and valuable, it has a very small group of people. I think the number you quoted was 3% that are probably authentic followers. And that's probably enough if we get all the 3%. But we tend to, once we get the 3%, then we want the 13% and the 33%. And now we've changed strategies. We're riding 2 horses. Doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm talking about the smallest viable audience here. And 3%, not only is it enough, it's way more than you need. You do not need 3% of the population. You do not need, unless you're running for elected office, 3% is an enormous number of people. It took Starbucks decades of profitable growth to get to the point where 3% of the people in this country bought a coffee every day, right? 3%, none of my books have reached even close to 1%. It's enough. So it's so freeing to be able to say, it's not for you, right? So there are companies that aren't going to hire Richard Brooke because he's wearing an Aloha shirt. Okay, fine. It's not for you. If that's a problem for you, I'm not here for you. And that willingness to be clear about who you are, as opposed to saying, I'm for everyone, you can pick anyone, pick me, That's why you have to build a locksmith, because you're like, all locksmiths are the same. I'm the first one in the phone book.
Right.
That's not a good place to be, because someone might add one more A and now you're the second one in the phone book.
Yeah. And that 3% is enough. Yeah. If so it kind of begs the question though, this is maybe a simple question, but that you've already answered, but how do we stay on strategy and even like you said in the book, refer, when you talked about in the book about referring people that are not a fit to your competitors, I was visualizing a website that actually dedicated some space to, hey, here's who we are. And if we're not for you, here's 3 links.
Yeah.
Go here.
If you're not doing that, you're not serious. I think that that's required. I mean, why have I blurbed hundreds of books over the years? I do it because someone's done it for me and paying it forward matters. But I also do it because if you're looking for a book on X and I haven't written it, well, then go read that book, because I'm not trying for market share here. The more books people read, the better. And if you walk into a Ferrari dealership and say, I got 7 kids, they're not going to try to persuade you to buy an Enzo. They're going to say, my brother's got a Volvo dealership down the street. I'll call him and tell him I'm sending you over there. If you're not regularly sending people to folks that feel like the competition, you are not serious about having a position in the marketplace.
And so how do we do that, Seth? And, I work with, they are really smart people with some of them really big companies and huge resources, and they just don't see that. They don't see staying in their lane. They don't see staying focused on that 3%. It's always about expanding.
Yeah.
Because that's how they see growth. How do you grow continuously and stay focused on your niche?
Well, I never use the word niche. And I think that more is not the goal. Better is the goal.
Yeah.
So if they're smart enough to hire you, it begins with a conversation about what does better mean, right? Who would you like to become? Is it better to have more customers if they're angry and constantly pushing you to lower the price and the quality? Is that kind of more better for you, right? That if you get a little of this, will more of it make you happier? And yes, the fact is there are crazy, committed people who will be more famous than you because they're willing to sacrifice everything, or who will have more money because they're willing to sacrifice everything. Are you really one of those people? If you are, you're not a client for me. I mean, I don't have clients, but that's the point. Or does better mean every one of your products is something you can point to, and that 25 years from now, this organization is still going to be trusted and resiliently present? If that's better, let's get very clear about that and not compromise. Let's get very clear about how do we keep making that happen. And, a simple example, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
A guy read some of my stuff. He had a commercial insurance brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. And they were doing millions and millions of dollars of business. And after he read some things I wrote, he ripped out their entire voice phone system. And it cost $1 million in payroll to staff the place so that every call got answered on the first ring. And it's because he wanted to run a company where if someone cared enough to call, they cared enough to answer.
Yeah.
And it paid for itself in 3 months. But it's also because he wanted to be that guy who you call me and someone's going to answer the phone.
I did that same thing, Seth, about 20 years into my company. It didn't cost that much because it wasn't that big, but shifted from automation to everybody's answering the phones, and there was overflow. If it got too much, other people's phones started ringing, and all you had to do was be a live voice, say your name, ask their name, how can I help you? And we win.
Yeah. And because you can be proud of the work. What we have forgotten in the industrialized world is the meaning of enough.
Yeah.
And, every person listening to this is richer by far than the last king of France was. You have access to more resources and more food and health and everything else than the king of France did. So why break your day up and make it miserable because you want more than that? It's enough.
I'm constantly in that conversation around I have a neighbor here. He's a 7-iron from me. I haven't hit a 7-iron into his pool yet, but he's, Larry Ellison, and you know enough about him, but it constantly baffles my mind to watch what he does with his resources. And I just wonder, what's the thinking about enough is enough? And when could you start to divert some billions to causes that might heal the planet and heal humanity?
I know people like Larry. Here's my thesis. My thesis is when it's very quiet and you're with yourself, sometimes it gets very noisy in there.
Yeah.
And the best way to make the noise go away is to go back to that thing you're good at, to keep score of that one thing that you're keeping score of, and to let that noise subside and be comfortable with that person you've decided to become is very scary. And so they're human beings. The billionaires I know, they're human beings, but they're hiding. And what they're hiding behind is something that the culture rewards them for.
Yeah.
And I feel badly for them because they did something very hard and now they're wasting it.
Okay. A couple other stories I want you to tell. Scrumpter's creative destruction. Can you speak to that? I found that to be, wow, that's profound.
Well, he was an economist who lived 80 or 100 years ago. Joseph Schumpeter basically argued that when a new technology or innovation comes along, it will always undo something that was here. And that's part of the deal, that we don't have a lot of blacksmiths. There are still some, but the whole blacksmith idea got waylaid by Henry Ford. So there's a creative destruction that's going on. Henry Ford didn't do it because he didn't like blacksmiths. He did it because he saw a problem that he could solve with this other approach. So what we need to do is ignore sunk costs, watch the assets we've built go away with a smile on our face, realizing that built into every game, every system, is that it's not going to keep playing the way it was.
Yes, ignoring sunk costs was the profound moment. I'm a little bit of an amateur poker player, and a lot of money is lost because you've already got money in the pot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you know this, Richard. When you're playing poker, do you fold a lot? Right? Because you're good.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But early and often.
Right, but bad players don't do that.
Right.
Bad players say, well, I've already anteed up. I might as well keep playing the hand.
Yeah.
And, my friend Danny Duke, who was world poker champion, probably folded more than anyone in the tournament because that's how you win.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. Metcalfe's law, systems architects, and how I want to wrap this interview up is I want to talk about the Carbon Almanac and that project and our planet and the whole, the big system and big game of, wow, at the expense of our oxygen and our water and our food and our place to live, we're consuming more and more and more stuff. That doesn't make sense.
All right, well, we can leave Metcalfe's law for the explanation in the book because it's not quite related to the Carbon Almanac, but I'd very much like to help people understand. So I wrote my first blog post about the climate 20 years ago, and it didn't make any difference. And what a surprise. And then I discovered I wasn't blogging about it very often. And there were two reasons. One is I felt underinformed, and two, I was a hypocrite. And the phrase carbon footprint which we all know, was actually invented by an ad agency hired by British Petroleum to make us feel like hypocrites.
Wow.
Because they figured that if informed, privileged people felt like hypocrites, they wouldn't talk about all the stuff that's going on with the climate until they fixed their own lives. But fixing your own life is impossible because the only way to go to zero is to disappear. So then this whole mythology got built of the way to, quote, save the earth, unquote, is to reduce a little bit of the plastic, to not eat meat one day a week or whatever it is. But what we did at the Carbon Almanac, I volunteered full-time, 12 hours a day, a year and a half of my life, to coordinate this book, which had 1,900 co-authors. We wrote a 97,000-word book in 5 months. We didn't make one mistake. It's footnoted, it's illustrated, and you can look it all up. And the idea was to help people see the system. And when you see the system, you realize that we don't have an individual action problem. We have a systems problem. So 25% of the climate problem, 1/4 of it, is directly related to cows. So that means if you stop eating beef, it's not going to make a difference. But if you put effort into changing the beef system by creating cultural shifts and production shifts, it will have a huge impact. If we see that 8% of our problem is directly related to fast fashion and cheap clothing, because everyone wears clothes, we need to figure out how to make systemic changes in how people create and buy clothes. That will make a difference. And the third one, which amazes people, is concrete. Concrete is also 8% of the problem. And when we think about what we build and how we build it and where we build it, well, in many cities around the world, you may not build a 5-story building out of wood because the building code says you can't. But that building code was written 100 years ago. So if we do systemic work to change building codes for cross-laminated timber, we can make systemic change happen. And we caused the problem of climate by building a system that did this to our climate. And now we just need to build a system that undoes it. But we're not going to do it by feeling bad or hating other people. We're going to do it by seeing the system, coming up with a strategy to change the system.
Yeah, you've done just brilliant work there. I don't know anybody that's ever undertaken what you did with the Carbon Almanac. That was really, really remarkable. And whole group of people all over the world rallied that were maybe just independent voices and visions, but rallied behind that vision of yours. So last question I have for you, Seth, is I laughed out loud twice in the book towards the end.
Okay.
And this was just brilliant strategy. And I just love brilliant, creative, like, whoa, I didn't see that coming strategy. And you told 2 awesome stories there. And you have so many stories in the book that I just want everybody interested in building a company to read all those stories, because they provide an opportunity for us to see that every day, if we put ourselves in the position of thinking outside the box and asking the question, standing in the question, we could come up with an idea that just a little crazy idea, like every Wednesday is Blue Jean Wednesday. That was my first laugh out loud. Wow.
It changed my life. It
Tell
really
that
did.
story.
So, I was a wet-eared college student in 1978, 79. And it's hard for a lot of people to remember. But in 1978 and 79, you probably didn't know very many people who had come out as gay. It was really socially difficult to do that.
Yep.
And on the college campus, blue, I can visualize it right now, blue mimeographed signs showed up one day. And all they said was, it was Monday. All they said is, Wednesday is wear blue jeans if you're gay day. That's all it said. There was no sponsor name. There was no phone number. That's all it said. And it caused a crisis, a tension. Because I'm saying to myself, well, I own blue jeans, but I'm not gay. So should I wear blue jeans in solidarity? But if I don't wear blue jeans, am I saying I'm afraid? Like, what should I do? And this conversation in my head, multiplied by the 4,000 people on my campus, gave people empathy, because this is something that a person who's gay had to do every single day. And we only had to do it for 5 minutes. And it just shifted dramatically for me how I thought about being in the world. But if you think about it from a marketing and advertising point of view, the strategy of that tactic was, how do I bring tension to people who are ignoring this issue?
Yeah. And so beautiful, so elegant, so simple. And maybe the first time you saw Creating a Ruckus. Last story, and I'll let you go, because I know it's late in your day. The blue ribbons. That was the best. That was the best. That was the, wow. This is so simple, so out of the box, so viral. Yeah. I mean, this just has to work. This is such a natural, organic, I don't know if you call it a game.
I don't want to go
system,
so far as to say it has to work. I think that what happened was we gave people who were looking for a chance to speak up the chance to speak up.
Yeah, tell that story.
The version of the story is the Department of Education awards blue ribbon status to the best schools around the country. And our elementary school in this little town, there's only 120 kids per grade all the way through 12th grade. We were very proud of our elementary school. Anyway, in New York State, where I live, there's a school board budget every year. And if the budget doesn't pass the vote, you get one more try. And if the second election doesn't go well, then the state is allowed to take over your school and make really draconian changes. And all the years we've lived here, the budget has easily passed. But as the budget went up year after year, the percentage of people in town who were retired, who didn't have kids, who were on fixed incomes, they said, we can't handle this anymore. And they organized, and the budget lost. So now there's only one chance left. How are you going to get this budget to pass? Now, the easy, tempting thing is to politic, to yell and to shame the people who voted no, to figure out how to get people who don't vote in these elections to vote, to debate and debate and debate. And instead, 3 people went to the stationery store and bought 100 yards of blue ribbon. And there's a big tree in front of the high school that almost every single person in town has to drive past. And they just hung blue ribbons in that tree. That's it. And over the next week, without any organization whatsoever, hundreds of people in town started flying blue ribbons on their trees. And you would just drive around town and see nothing but blue ribbons. And when they had the second vote, the budget passed 3-1. Because the lesson is simple. People like us do things like this, that you want to be part of people like us. And when you gave people a chance to do that without making them feel divided, without making them feel dumb, they showed up to do it. And if you just do the tactic, it's not going to work. But if you can find the empathy for people to do what they want to do all along, then strategy can work.
Yeah, that's a great story. So creative, so elegant. And Seth, I just want to thank you for your time today. I know it's precious, and I know you guard it as gold, as you should. And I promise to get this out so many generations of people continue your legacy. I want to personally acknowledge you for giving me a guiding light to work in a profession that is a strong current going the other way that I go. And my mission is to change it for the people that want to change. And you've been a great guide and inspiration there in giving me content, giving me courage, and giving me competency. So thank you, sir, for joining the Authentic Networker podcast. And I look forward to studying you many more years down the road.
Well, you're very kind, Richard. Back to you. The ruckus you make matters, and the people who listen to you appreciate it. We would miss you if you weren't here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a great evening.
You too.